There is no such thing as a bad MSRP, only a bad street price. That is the saying that I'm going to be looking at going forward with GPUs, because these MSRPs, they don't mean a whole lot when you're getting, even in Australia, the launch price of this graphics card coming at 21% over MSRP. Now, I do understand that in Australia, we pay a 10% goods and consumptions tax, which is a GST, and so that still makes it, though, 11% higher than this card should be. And if we look to the US, that's where I made my predictions for in yesterday's video for the 500 plus USD price tag that you will see for the RTX 5060 Ti 16GB. Now, there is some good things that are coming out with this card. I like the fact that you're getting 16GB of VRAM and you're not paying copious amounts of extra money for it, unlike the 4060 Ti 16GB, where Nvidia thought it was a great idea to charge an additional $100 just for an extra 8GB of GDDR6 VRAM, not even the 7 stuff, the newer stuff that they're putting in this card, which would be arguably more expensive anyhow. So this shows that Nvidia can give us better pricing, but the biggest problem with this card, well, there's actually two big problems I personally have with it, and that is that even versus Nvidia's own higher end card, like a 5070, it's worse value when you add everything up. And even though that's got 4GB VRAM less, it's just weird to see a 60 class card, or in this case, a 60 Ti class card, which the 60 Ti was pretty much traditionally, before the 4000 series, just the best value for raw rasterization performance. It's just shocking to see that this 60 Ti class card is coming in with worse value now than the 70 class card. Not to mention the 9070, which is then even much better value than that. So it's almost like Nvidia decided to come to the table with the launch of the RTX 5060 Ti with AMD and say, hey, we're going to sit down and play Uno. And then AMD's like, well, you can use the standard deck. We're going to use the Uno No Mercy deck. And then Nvidia's thinking to themselves, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's just handicap ourselves. It makes no sense to me personally why Nvidia is choosing this path of hollowing out the lower end cards, but the only reason I can figure out is that it makes dollars. But even then, if we look at the Steam survey charts, the RTX 3060 is still on top. That's a 3000 series class card that is over 4 years old, meaning that gamers on 3000 series don't really have an incentive or motivation to upgrade to the 4000 series card. And now with the lackluster performance increases with the 5060 Ti, I think also an upgrade to the 5000 series. But let's start off with these gaming benchmarks, where we're going to start off with the raw rasterization numbers first, because I believe this is very important to look at these numbers, especially for people playing competitive multiplayer titles, and especially at 1440p, where the price of a new 1440p monitor is so inexpensive, especially compared to the price that you're going to pay for this graphics card in particular. It makes sense to just test at 1440p going forward versus say 1080p. But here's where if we look at Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p ultra settings, here's where it's only a mere 33% faster than the 3060 Ti, which again is a 4.5-year-old card. And then if we look at the 5070, that's a whopping 30% faster. Whereas back in the day, I do remember off the top of my head, the 3070 being about 10% faster than the 3060 Ti. But going over to 4K, we can see the gap widens here, with the 5070 now being 37.5% faster than the 5060 Ti. Then the 5060 Ti carries even less of a gap at 4K than it did at 1440p versus the 3060 Ti being around 29% faster. Moving on to Black Myth Wukong, 27% faster at 1440p than the 3060 Ti, then the 5070 being 33% faster over the 5060 Ti. So kind of like right in between a 3060 Ti and a 5070. Going up to 4K, the 5070 is 37% faster than the 5060 Ti, and then that's also 28% faster than the 3060 Ti. Going over to Final Fantasy 16, we see that this is probably one of the worst case scenarios for the gap here being only 14% faster, and then the higher tier card being 38% faster. Going up to 4K, it's then a 40% gap for the 5070, and then the 5060 Ti is only 20% faster than its 4.5-year-old predecessor. Going over to Riftbreaker with ray tracing turned on, here's where we've got 39% faster for the 5070, and then that 5060 Ti is only 29% faster. And then going up to 4K, it's a story of 35% and 32% respectively. Going over to Fortnite at 1440p, 38% and 22% respectively. Then also at 4K, 43% and only 15% for the 5060 Ti over the 3060 Ti. So very similar to Final Fantasy 16 here in that you're not getting that much of a gain over that 4.5-year-old 60 Ti class card. Though, moving on to Marvel Rivals, 26% faster for the 5070, then the 5060 Ti over the 3060 Ti, 19% faster, going up to 4K, 29%, and then 34% respectively. So looking at those performance figures for raw rasterization first, where we'll pull up some value charts here, the 5060 Ti is actually worse value than the 5070. And again, just like we said in the intro, this is really unusual for a 60 Ti class card. But I guess that just has to do with the sheer drop in CUDA cores and just how cut down this 128-bit bus 60 Ti class model is nowadays, despite it having that 16 gigabytes of VRAM. For me personally, I'd much rather have 12 gigabytes of VRAM and a faster card that's coming closer to the 5070. I would have liked to have seen this been actually based on the 5070 die and been cut down. And I also think when we look at the value charts here, it should be a better price too, perhaps $399, and that would have just made it, in my opinion, a better value choice on the charts, and it would have made it a better recommendation. However, what you can see in these value charts here is it's worse value than the 5070. It's also worse value, much worse value than the 9070, but the reason I talked about the 5070 and the 3060 Ti in the graphs is because that's against NVIDIA's own stack of cards themselves. The 9070 is the best value for a new card at this point in time, and it's in stock both in the US and Australia. And in other parts in the world, I'm sure it's going to be in stock as well. However, if we're looking at an older model like the 7800 XT, for example, in Australia, the street pricing of this card is showing even better value than NVIDIA's latest and greatest 60 Ti class card. Now that's just the raw rasterization performance. Let's paint the whole picture here with ray tracing, where we're going to test at 4K because this is where the 16 gigabyte is going to show a big difference between the 8 gigabyte model, but also going to turn on then DLSS 3 and 4 for these cards, and then see that lower resolution alleviate some of the RAM bottlenecks on the 8 gigabyte models. But here's where in Cyberpunk, the 8 gigabyte model is completely checked out. This was also a similar story for Black Myth Wukong, but then also moving on to Dragon Age with the raw ray tracing numbers, I decided to include this game just for ray tracing because I had the benchmarks already done for the other cards. It was okay here too. But you will notice that AMD's latest 9000 series cards have had a big improvement in ray tracing, and that's making them not such a bad choice for people who want to turn on ray tracing while they're gaming too. Though NVIDIA's big selling point with the RTX 5000 series, of course, is DLSS 4, and in particular, multi-frame generation. Now, in my opinion, the best thing NVIDIA has done with the RTX 5000 series launch was the transformer model change with their DLSS upscaling. I thought this was absolutely gorgeous, and the fact that they rolled this out for all RTX users was a big plus. However, the multi-frame generation is very hit or miss. I feel like it's really only there for people who want to enjoy a smoother frame rate for role-playing games, and also, that said, have a higher base frame rate to begin with. Me personally, I'd like to have at least 50 FPS, otherwise I start to feel an extreme amount of extra added on input lag that is just noticeable. However, the DLSS 4 does work quite well, especially over DLSS 3, and if we're looking at it versus the 4060 Ti 8GB, you are getting a sizable boost there in particular scenarios. Though here's where, in my experience, the DLSS upscaling is much more of an important feature than the DLSS frame generation. In fact, when I sell a lot of gaming PCs, it's usually people who are coming around and buying the computer to play competitive multiplayer titles. And so they do use the upscaling, but they don't use the frame generation. And I feel like this would be the scenario for actually the majority of gamers. So if they're not using the frame generation, then it makes it so that the 3060 Ti is still a very viable option for a lot of 1440p gamers. And so in my opinion, there's no compelling reason for anyone to go out and buy a 5060 Ti when in fact, a lot of people buying 60 class cards are really doing it because they probably want to play competitive multiplayer titles on a budget and still get a smooth frame rate. But this time around, as we're looking at those raw rasterization numbers, the value is just not really there. And so that's the biggest problem with the 5060 Ti. I wish NVIDIA did more, whether it's dropping the price down more or giving you more performance in the form of a more or giving you simply more performance in the form of a cut down 5070 instead of using a 5060 Ti 128-bit bus solution. Though here's the final point for me when it comes to value and pricing. I've now had the chance to wake up on launch day and delay this review by a few hours at the very least, and I'm able to see the launch prices here. So in Australia, lo and behold, it is hitting that MSRP price that Nvidia promised to Australians. But that's because it's already, again, 21% over the USD converted MSRP. And so again, back to that GST consumption tax, it's still 11% higher than it should be. But then if we go over to the US, it's again following that same trend where they're around, again, about 20% higher in price. So unfortunately, if you were looking for a 60 class card that was just going to absolutely kick tail in terms of just raw value, regardless of everything else, this card unfortunately isn't it. However, the last thing I will go over, and one thing that I did find impressive with this card, was the undervolting. Not so much the power consumption. If we look at the power consumption results versus the FPS we're getting, in Warhammer Space Marine 2, for example, we can see that the actual efficiency of the 9070 is really up there in terms of topping the charts. And we've got a video coming on the 9070 very soon, because this card, at least from my calculations, is coming in with the lowest surcharge on street pricing too. But here's where the 5060 Ti, once you undervolt it, it does do incredibly well. I got this thing to actually perform better than it did out of the box, but with much lower power consumption. So an incredible result here for the undervolting scores for the 5060 Ti. However, that good news does quickly come to a close when we look at the sheer temperatures and noise of this MSI Ventus 2X out of the box. In fact, it was unbearable for me personally. The default fan speeds went up to 51% and the card just got really loud. I'll let you guys have a quick listen to this thing out of the box. So in my opinion, if you are getting the Ventus 5060 Ti, the 2X edition here, I think it's an absolute must to undervolt this thing. Like, you have to do it. And not just for the extra performance and power savings, but also for your ears to have some sort of sanity while you're playing games. I think it's that loud, it even goes through closed back headphones. Also, I don't know if it was just this particular model that I got in. It could be variants and I just got a bad model, but I could have sworn I heard some bearing noises where it's just, you know, scraping and whining a little bit. And yeah, if you do get one of these cards and you notice that bearing issue, do let us know in the comment section below, so we can kind of, perhaps if this model is a faulty model in general, that can be identified and people can avoid it. And just holding both these cards in my hand, it's crazy that in 4.5 years, you've just got really such a stagnant increase in performance on the 60 Ti class card, which was traditionally always Nvidia's just roaring top of the charts value card. And it's just sad to see that this is now coming in with less value than a 5070. And of course, if we're looking at the competitors' cards, they're actually well ahead of the bell curve. So I kind of would like to see the price drop a little bit on this particular 5060 Ti 16GB. Now, in terms of the 8GB, I feel like more performance out of 12GB of VRAM. I personally would prefer that. And I feel like that would have been a win for the 5060 Ti if Nvidia decided to do that. But also, that said, I do understand inflation. In fact, I talk about it a lot here at Tech Yes City. And so basically what you've seen with the 60 Ti class card is a thing known as shrinkflation. That's where they're trying to keep the price the same for you guys, but really they're masking the inflation with giving you less product. And that's pretty much easy to see here now, 4.5 years later, with what you were getting with the 3060 Ti back in 2020, late 2020, and now what you're getting with the 5060 Ti in 2025. Now, I do understand why Nvidia would do this, but at the same time, I don't understand why Nvidia would then have it so that it's worse value than cards that are higher priced in the stack. It's like after the 3000 series, Nvidia decided to go to a much different model and then absolutely hollow out the 60 class cards. And the Steam survey charts are kind of starting to show that, with the 3000, or in particular the 3060, still being well on top of the charts here and not looking like it's going to come off that top position anytime soon. anyhow, guys, with all that aside, hope you enjoyed today's review. If you did, be sure to hit that like button and also let us know in the comment section below what you think of the 5060 Ti. And with that aside, I'm going to check myself out and we're going to test some budget CPUs. Then we're going to test out the RX 9070 too. We'll actually do the review of it. I've already done the benchmarking for it, but time is so strapped here in Australia at the moment. Getting back, I might make a vlog for you guys talking about all the issues I'm facing personally, because it's crazy on the Gold Coast right now where I'm at. Like if you're looking for a place, it's like 40 groups of people. One place I looked at, they had a max of 30 groups and they had to cap it legally or something like that. They told me 30 groups of people came in to look for a place just to rent. And then I had to go the next day because I couldn't get in on that time slot. Anyhow, it's absolutely crazy right now. And with that aside, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out for now. Bye.